Hey everyone, we are live officially. I know we're a couple minutes late, but we're here. So I'm Christopher Swan, and this is the latest episode of Our Stories Live. So Our Stories Live, this may be new for you because it's on Facebook. This is the first time it's actually on Facebook. And it used to be on Instagram, and now we're going to try something new. We're going to bring it over here today. So Our Stories Live is a show where I interview people that are celebrating what makes them different just by being themselves and following their own path. So I'm excited about this today. We're going to see how this works. I hope this is going to be amazing and awesome this time versus what we did with Instagram. So before I bring on the guest, I want to ask everybody, if you're watching live or if you're watching the replay, put in the comments where you're watching from so we can give you a shout out. Okay, so let's introduce our guest. So let me bring him on. And and here he is. So let's get rid of this. There we are. So everybody, I want you to meet Cozine Welch Jr. I'm going to do a little intro of Cozine. He's an educator, a reform advocate, a poet, a writer, and really that's just a sample of the things that he does. He works for the Prison Creative Art Project at the University of Michigan. He's a co-instructor of the Atonement Project. He's the managing editor of the Michigan Review of Prison Creative Writing. And also, and I know that we'll probably talk about this, he was also incarcerated at 17, and I think I have these numbers right, with a sentence of 22 to 40 years at a Michigan prison, and you were, I think, released in 2017.
That's correct,
Yeah.
September.
Okay. Also, while you were incarcerated, you became a published writer in the Michigan Review of Prisoner Creative Writing. And that's important to know because I think that will be a big part of our conversation today. So that's Cozine. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And you're my first guest on Facebook. So this is exciting to me. Like, we're going to see how fancy we can make this.
Hey.
All right. So what I generally like to do for this is we're just going to jump into some questions to just start the ball rolling, and then we'll see where it takes us. So I talked a little bit about, obviously that important point of you became this published writer. So I want to talk a little bit about why did you start, or when did you start writing, and why?
Let's see. How far back do we go? So if we want to go to the actual true starting point, would have to be in grade school.
Okay.
I had a teacher by the name of Miss Voigt, Miss Amy Voigt, who some way or other saw some writing of mine or some doodles and thought I had a talent and decided to nurture that and actually had me write a poem that she then submitted to a local contest, which I won.
Wow.
And I think that was the first moment where writing produced by myself actually felt like it had some real worth. From that, I went into music, liked music a lot, loved music, fashioned myself a hip hop artist for a while, strictly personally, right? Not professionally at all.
Yeah.
And that's writing, right? I like to refer to rap as rhythm and poetry. It's an old acronym people used to use and don't use much anymore. So it's through that and kind of growing out of the previous mindset I was in, looking for and searching for and wanting different things, but also feeling like I had to have some creative outlet. And so when it came to hip hop, the things I would rap about, I no longer believed in or led a life that way. So I couldn't continue to talk about them. Right. So I wanted to talk about thoughts and feelings and emotions and insights that I had gained and I did feel. And poetry just seemed the natural outpouring of that. And so I was fortunate enough to see the PCAP had a notice up for it was the second volume of the Michigan Review of Prisoner Creative Writing. And so I submitted and I was accepted, got feedback. And from then on, it just kept going. I just kept submitting every year, and 11 years straight, I was in every issue. I have to say this, so my editor will have my head. I have to. He always makes sure that I let people know I'm the most published writer in the history of which is a real distinction, right? It's because this is we really do go through the work to make sure we get the best out of our writers. So it's not any small notice. It just makes me embarrassed to always say
it. Though I've read it. I have read actually that the accolade online as well. So I knew that about you. So I think you should talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, well, I'm curious then. I want to go like kind of maybe halfway into that story. Before you submitted, like, was there a time in prison where like writing became even more important to you? Or like, how did it become a real focus to say, hey, I really want to publish this?
I think it's cathartic, right? And I think one of the reasons why our program works so well is because the creative arts are cathartic and they are therapeutic. So I think for me, it initiated from that place where the actual act of writing and sending it to loved ones helped me express something that I may not have had the actual long, as I call it, the longhand language. But with poetry, I could find concise ideas and images and translate that emotion, much like in music.
Yeah.
So that's how it started, was just reaching out to families and friends and trying to communicate emotions and feelings that I was having, that poetry seemed to be the only medium that served it well.
So you were actually writing poems to family and friends?
I was.
Yeah, that's actually pretty special, because I would suspect it would just be like, letters of some sort, like long writing, as you said. Well, then how did you hear about the review? Like, how did you even know to be able to publish into that or to submit it?
Well, I was at a correctional facility called Thumb Correctional. It's in Lapeer, Michigan.
Okay.
And at the time, the university had a writing workshop at the facility. And so I had tried to get into the writing workshop. As you can imagine, the list was long. And so I didn't make the cut. But after feeling like down about not making the cut, I was talking to a friend of mine. He was like, hey, I just saw a poster up in the day room about some book they've got going on. And I was like, what? So I went and looked at it and I was like, oh, I can submit to this. And that's how it started. Yeah. So I just submitted. I beat the deadline and submitted.
So what was it like when you found out that you actually were accepted?
So it was like really exciting. It felt, so when you accomplish things, right, that you either were not aware or didn't think you could initially, or had not even been an idea, and then you realize that you have what it takes, because you have to take into consideration, right? This is the University of Michigan. The people making these decisions are staff, faculty, professors, and students at the University of Michigan. So they don't just let anything get through, right? It's not as if they're not patronizing prison writers and saying, oh, okay, well, sure, we'll just get you in here from based on the virtue that you can write words, right? It's not that. It's a real accolade. And so, and after exchanging with the editors at the time, if I didn't know it, it was reinforced when I got that first edition, because when you submit, you get a free edition of your own. And I got to see the quality of the writing I was alongside. So that was like, wow.
That changes everything. I love that. Because it's one thing to submit it, right? But then to actually see what you're actually compared or connected to, what you became and what you joined. That's cool.
Right. Because and it was like that. One thing I love so much about it was it's hard to find inspiration inside. You don't have access to a lot of materials. You don't have access to a lot of contemporary poetry and books because of the strict structure that the department places on incoming mail and books, and they really control the flow of information. So that means you don't get access to a lot of contemporary sources. So poetry was not something I could actually get a lot of while inside. But the review would come out every year, and that would be my inspiration, because there would be writers in there, and I would be like, how did I make it in the same book as them? Right? And their writing would inspire me to continue on.
How did you even know how to write poetry? In that, especially at that age in your life, because you went to prison pretty early on in your life. So were you learning while you were incarcerated?
I think that's a wonderful thing. It's funny because I just did a symposium yesterday here at the university, and I was giving a presentation on the lit review and how we're using it for research purposes. But one of the points I made that I always make is that, so I'll give you a quick excerpt from the presentation. So I mashed up a poem that has Jamal May, Dinesh Smith, and our own published writer, Kanari Giovanni. And so this mashup has no one's name. I just take sections from poems of theirs, and I create a poem. And I challenge the audience to be able to tell me which section is from an incarcerated writer and which section is from an MFA graduate, cave canem, extraordinaire, because Dinesh Smith and Jamal May are just that. And you can't tell. The quality of the writing is that good that you can't tell. I say that to say, while inside, you kind of have to develop your own way of improvement. right? You don't have access to the tools that an MFA graduate studies program would give you, or English courses in general. You have to develop that toolbox that everyone uses in the written and spoken language on your own. And you do it through trial and error, through a lot of self-editing, through listening, being through kind of reading other works and being able to garner in some not indistinct way, but true way, what craft is. So often you'll find we often do it through rhythm. Rhythm is often where we start because that's the thing we have inherently. I know for me personally, because of my background with music, rhythm was always inherent there. And the realization of knowledge of knowing how to separate rhymes into bars and that nature allowed me to have a starting knowledge of what line breaks can do. So I think that's how we do it in these incarcerated spaces. We take the books that we can get access to, the things in media we can get access to through television or what have you, and we just pull from that is what we can, and it's trial and error. That's what makes the review so great, is because I'll give you a great example. So I've got a young man I know by the name of, what is Daniel's last name? I'll remember his last name in a second. He's in volume 6, I believe. But Daniel was actually someone I knew while I was inside. And he was like, hey, you're getting these books. What are you doing? And I'm like, well, I just, I write. He's like, yeah, but I want to write, but I don't think I'm good enough to make it. And I was like, well, look, you just try. I was like, you just try and you submit. And if you don't make it, they'll give you feedback and let you know what you need to do to improve, which is like one of the most important things a review does. So lo and behold, Daniel submitted it. And no, he didn't get in, but he did get feedback. And that very next year, he submitted again with the feedback and he made it. The very next year, his submission made it and was published. So that's the secondary, what sometimes is called the secondary most necessary part of the experience, is that the lit review gives you feedback, and feedback makes you better.
And that's not common.
No,
that I know of submitting, when you submit to any kind of publication, you're not usually getting feedback. You usually get a no or a yes.
Right. But like we understand that writing means so much more to our incarcerated applicants than anyone.
Yeah.
And the fact that, like I said, it's cathartic, it's therapeutic, but also it has an entrepreneurial spirit to it that anyone who's formerly incarcerated has to develop. And writing is one of those avenues where your incarcerated record doesn't necessarily hold a stronger case against you as in other forms of employment, right? You can think like writing can be used in everything from advertisements, right? You can work for a company and write their advertisements. You can work for a newspaper. There's many ways. You can work for Hallmark. There's many ways you can bring writing into a workforce, right? That allow you much more lateral movement than perhaps other positions with an incarcerated record.
Yeah. You said something there too that I didn't realize, like entrepreneurial spirit, like this. Yeah, I guess you kind of do. And it started to make me think about, I want to jump forward a little bit now then. So let's say, okay, 2017, your re-entry, you're being released. Did you know what was next for you then? Like you're leaving now what?
Not at all. In no way. It's frightening because you're an adult who now has the measure. You now have to juggle fitting in with. So I like looking in terms of traffic, right? So you're coming onto the off ramp. You got to get with the flow of traffic. You're expected to, right? So you have to do that, but you also have to learn the traffic laws as you go, right? Because you're newly, right? It's your first time on the highway, and who knows how long. The highway looks different. Cars look different. Everything is different. Only thing that's the same is you're expected to keep up. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you have to keep up and at the same time learn the rules of how to keep up simultaneously. So I was terrified. All I knew with certainty was that I did in fact have PCAP as a resource, as like a real welcoming environment. I mean, they would come get me from Detroit, where I was staying with my father's house. They would come pick me up, right? They made sure that so our reentry project does everything we can to make sure we reach out to people who have come home and bring them to where the resources and the people are.
Okay.
As much as we can with our limited resources. And that's what was done with me. So though I didn't know what would happen, I still had this place of relative comfort and safety in the fact that I had friends in the committee friends in the organization in PCAP that sincerely cared about me being a success. Even if they themselves didn't know exactly what it would be, they were there to be around and help me through the process of figuring it out. And I think that is what makes all the difference. Because most of us don't come home with any certificates or degrees. that would allow us to actually make anything. And even if we do, it's still an uphill climb. And we need a community of resources. And that's what PCAP does, for instance, with the Linkage Project, is to create a community of resources and outreach for returning prisoners and creatives who want to do something either with their art or just in general, right? So, and I think that's what made all the difference.
Do you feel like that's missing, that's reentry piece of it, that, you know, like that help, the guidance, the whatever, the support, is that, do you think, missing in a lot of like reform, or not even just reform, just in the reentry, if there's a reentry program or not in the prison systems?
Definitely, because you have to take so many factors into consideration, right? So one of the main factors I try to point out that made the largest difference, or one of the largest impacts, was the fact that I came to Ann Arbor, right? So these resources were in Ann Arbor, Michigan, right? It was brought to Ann Arbor. I was taken from one environment and brought into another one where all the resources were. Let's just call it what it is, right? All the resources were here in Ann Arbor. The resources were not in Detroit, or I would have stayed in Detroit, right? But for reasons that are another long conversation, the resources weren't there. And so I was brought to where the resources are. And so that's the reason why so many programs either fail or don't get a good start at the beginning, at the outset, because resources aren't in place. And not just the resources, but the people with enough passion and desire to make use of those resources. See, like when you're in PCAP, you're part of an impassioned group who cares about the mission. People choose to come to PCAP, right? And most of our work is done on a volunteer basis. So people are choosing this, and that makes all the difference. That lets you know you're around people who really care and are really trying to make the most use of the resources they have available.
And PCAP, would you tell everybody what that stands for?
Oh, sorry. It's the Prison Creative Arts Project at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
So it's almost like if you didn't actually find the review, like that poster, submit, like this could have all not happened for you.
No, I mean, there's certain things you just can't know, right? You can't know other branches in time, right?
Right.
But I can say with much certainty as I can that no.
Yeah, that's intense to even think about. And there's so much pressure to even, because I loved your analogy, like, you know, getting on, you know, the highway, the freeway, and you're trying to merge the traffic and trying to figure out what the rules are at the same time. There's so much pressure into that. Even if somebody's helping you and guiding you, there's still a lot of things coming at you. Well, I want to jump into now your work, because I mentioned earlier, but you have, so you're in two roles. You work with the Prison Creative Arts Project in two roles. And I'd love for you to describe them both to me, the Atonement Project and the Review of Prison Creative Writing. So maybe, because we've heard a little bit more about the creative writing, but it's definitely give me a little bit more about the Atonement, because I think this is really special. I did some research, and I was kind of wowed by the founder and just the things that you guys have been doing. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then a little bit more about the review.
Okay, so the Atonement Project, as a course in the residential college at the University of Michigan, was founded by Shaka Senghor and our director Ashley Lucas. Shaka had this great idea of having a course structure which focused on atonement for people who had came home and society in general, which focusing more on restorative justice practices and what they are, what the principles are, how they should be applied, how they aren't applied in contemporary corrections work, etc. So that's kind of how it started. It started out of that wonderful idea, and it just kept going. Like, you can look Shaka Senghor up yourself, and you'll see why. You'll understand, like, oh, this is why it's still going. It had such a great start, such passion to begin with. And so what we do is we have a few things we do. So, like I said, we speak about restorative justice practices and principles. We speak about the history of incarceration in spaces. We talk about the history of the creative arts in incarcerated spaces, because in this class, we also train students to facilitate workshops in correctional facilities across Michigan. And we have writing workshops, we have photography workshops, we have music workshops, we have choral workshop, we have theater workshops, we have visual arts workshops. And this is all expanded from one small theater workshop at Women's Huron Valley because PCAP started in 1990 with Buzz Alexander and Mary Heinen. And like, that was how it started. One workshop at Women's Correctional Facility. And from that, we've expanded to all those workshops I just named and all across the state. Like, we literally get art submissions from practically every prison, even all the way up in the Upper Peninsula. So our reach is definitely across Michigan. So what the class itself does is then facilitate students or allow students to become facilitators, trains them how to be facilitators in these workshops in correctional facilities in Michigan throughout the semester, with the end goal of producing a final performance, which we all try to go to as much as we can. Our director, Ashley Lucas, she has a few doppelgangers because she will make it to every final performance she can. Bless her heart.
Cracking me up. Doppelgangers.
That's the passion, right?
Yeah.
That's the passion. So that's the gist of what the Atonement Project is. We also have theater incarceration, which follows along the same principle but focuses more on theater in incarcerated spaces, how it's been used over history to aid in both rehabilitation and for therapeutic purposes. And we also, one of the ringers of that is we have I guess you call it a sister organization in Brazil. And our students in that semester actually take a trip to the favelas in Brazil and see how in Brazil these actual practices are being worked out in real time in favelas and incarcerated spaces in Brazil. Mm-hmm. So those are the two courses that we teach, a quick wrap up of those. And then the actual review of prison creative writing. My role, are you asking what my role is?
Yeah, a little bit more about maybe talk a little bit about like, because we talked about like obviously you submitting it, but maybe what the goal or the scope of it is, and then what your role as a managing editor is.
So the goal is really quite simple, right? Our real goal is to make sure that we are doing everything we can as an editorial committee and as a review to give our contributors the most we can so they can become better writers in whatever capacity that is for them individually, not according to our own metric. We just want to make sure we allow them the space to do so. So that's like what the main mission. Everything else is just a means to produce that in. So what we're also doing is we're making sure that we have instituted brand new structures into the way we handle the review so that we can be best and most effective with that approach. So we really, like this year, we've really structured what the review means, what positions are, how to institute things, how to better reach our contributors. And so the scope of it. So like the scope of it has increased. So we went from, so the review started as just small booklets and individual writing workshops that our students and those involved in the workshops would create for their own benefit, right? And from that, the great idea came up, well, why don't we start a review? So in 2008, we had the very first volume 1 on words, and that set the stage for the Michigan Review as we know it. That's where we really started. Mm-hmm. And so our scope now has been to broaden our audience so that more people can see that we are a true literary journal, right? And that we do produce great writing from writers, regardless of whether or not they are in prison or not. And to that end, we've now like gotten our books. So there's a great local bookstore in Ann Arbor, it's pretty well known, called Literati, who has agreed to carry our books and also to allow us to use their online network for online sales. We have another great local bookstore called Bookbound. We have our books in now. We've gotten our books now into the University of Michigan's largest libraries. And so we're expanding our reach publicly, and we're producing or we're organizing more public readings so that people can see this work, that these authors and writers' voices can be heard and their writing can be seen, appreciated, and that entrepreneurial spirit I was talking about can produce fruit for them.
Well, I'm curious because, I mean, I think it's amazing, and I love how it's expanding. You've been, I think, in these roles like in March of last year, I think is when you started. Yeah. So something around that?
Yeah, March of last year.
Yeah. I think I had saw like a release about it. That's why I had read it. Like I said, I'd done some research on you. Nice. I know all about you. So I'm wondering, like, it hasn't been a long time, but you're like all in. And I also know all this other stuff that you've been doing as well. Like, I'm curious, like, now that you are helping to create this, like, this change, this movement, and you know, helping students, helping incarcerated folk, like, how has this impacted your life now in this last, like, year plus time?
Oh, wow. Talk about a loaded question.
Yeah, I know that's big, but...
Yeah. So... returning back to society, as the term is called, integrating back in society, whatever term or phrase you want to use, is difficult in more ways than just the obvious ones, right? As far as employment, career, there's also how do you manage having so many interpersonal relationships now? How do you manage to now almost seamlessly it almost seems like interpersonal relationships and technology are interwoven in such a way to where you can't have one without the other, and you use one to support the other. How do you manage that? How do you manage the lessons you have to learn from however many years you were gone? Like from myself, for instance, I was 17. So there's a lot of adulthood and experience that I just was unable to have. Now, where I was fortunate enough to grow in other ways, there are still some ways where I just have to experience it. Certain wisdom you just have to gain through experience. You know, you can't plan for it or plan out eventualities and probabilities as much as you want to, but you just can't know until you actually go through it. So I think the hardest part has been finding a way to make steady progress with that, in particular, like with mental and emotional health, because that's something as a returning citizen you have to figure out and find on your own, right? It's something that as a returning citizen, I believe every human being needs mental health care. But if you're a returning citizen, you need it more than most, and it's actually provided least to you and among most demographics and populations. So that's a struggle. But I'm fortunate in the sense that I always try to stress this point to people. When you see me here, you're seeing an anomaly. I have closer friends who are successful. We've all come home. And ironically enough, we're all related to PCAP in some way, right? And we are managing some level of success for ourselves, but we're anomalies. And we're anomalies because most people don't have the resources that we've had. And that is the real difference. Because I tell people all the time, I really appreciate that you like me, you think I'm charismatic, you think I have something to say, but you should have seen the people who taught me, who are inside that you will never see, because they either are never coming home or what have you, or they don't have the resources I have to where their voice is heard. And so that's something that's difficult to shoulder, but it's also something that gives you an impetus to keep moving, because I want that to change. I don't want to be an anomaly, right?
Right.
I want to. Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt, because it just made me think about does that what fuels your reform advocacy and your passion to change things?
Yeah, definitely. Because I know too many good people, too many people greater than me who would not have the opportunities and would not be able to do the wonderful things they could have done had they had the opportunity. Yeah. So it's like the fact that I have it, there's a responsibility I feel. And I shouldn't say responsibility, because it's not like a duty. It's not like something I have to shoulder. It's an opportunity, right? Like I have the opportunity to do what I can to make sure that those great people are heard, that I'm not standing up here by myself, right? Or with a select few, right? That I'm not an anomaly, but that I'm the norm. That when someone sees someone who looks like me and has my background, because of me or some of my other friends who are doing great work, they will stop whatever prejudice or preconceived notions or conditions they may have and remember, oh, that person might be like Cozine. Whatever it takes to bridge that gap so that real communication and real change can start, right? Like that is part of the fuel, and it's an opportunity. So, whenever opportunities come, you kind of take them.
You do, and it's true. It's like there's this little thing I heard in that too, which was, he's like, that person's like Cozine. I think change starts with those small little baby steps, right? It doesn't happen, preconceived notions. These ideas don't change overnight, right? It's the small things you chip away at it. I think that's a big reminder from you.
Yeah. I mean, because no matter, it's fun. I think we often stray away from the reality that we're communal people. And no matter how much technology or means we have to communicate, it's the person-to-person communication that often has the most impact, even if it's secondary, right? It starts somewhere. And that's where bonds are forged. That's where perceptions are changed. That's where commonality is found, right? We think we're different because for so long we've been assumed and conditioned to be different. Then we realize, so here's a great analogy I love to use, right? I love to use music. I guess it's just the wannabe musician in me, right? But I always tell people, no matter what genre of music you like or that you're aware of, every single genre of music has love songs, have songs of depression, have songs of loss, have songs of triumph, have songs of sadness, because those are just human conditions. Those are things we all share regardless of where we come from. And that's something we find when we communicate with people person to person. those preconceived notions break in the face of actually seeing someone's expression, hearing what they have to say, their tone of voice, their inflection, things they may say or make reference to that you're familiar with. Those are important, and that's where those walls start to crumble, and so that further work in progress can be made.
I'm really curious about how it's interesting. I'm gonna back up for a second. Even as you were just saying that, you sounded like a performer at that point. Like there was a moment there I was like, it's like you're on stage, and it just, I couldn't help but think like your analogy to music and the way that you actually speak. Is that part of the attraction to do all this other wonderful work that you're doing? I know that you are a poet, but you also can do slam poetry. You're on stage. You're at multiple events performing in ways. I know you like music. You play guitar. They can't see it, I don't think, but there's a guitar in your background. So there's multiple things you do. Is there some attraction there to like, can not just be able to make this change and do this kind of work, but also share it in a special way? Like I'm trying to understand a little bit more this connection to the performance that you're doing as well to the work of change.
Well, in humanity in general, right? There's always been this tradition of a type of performance to get across a feeling, a mood. I mean, even if you go back to the idea of the old wise person who was the elder and told the stories and was the elder of whatever grouping, right? They did so through some type of performance. The act of storytelling itself, passing wisdom down to generations itself, was a performance. I think as a species, we tend to refine and perform, right? It's just a part of our natural ability to communicate, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, yes, it's always there. And how do I say this? Entertainment just gets through to people, right?
It does.
Right? It's just that simple, right? We love entertainment. We love to be entertained. And entertainment is good for us. Right? Like it's a good thing to have. So if that entertainment can not only move our right brain, but our left brain as well, well, then I feel like it's entertainment, it's artistry with a message and that's movement based and can, fuel and add to a movement.
Yeah. No, and I completely agree. It's the reason I actually do shows like this. I host a podcast where I travel the nation as well. And that's because I found that sharing ideas and getting people to think differently and to see themselves in a different way happens through entertainment. I remember as a young kid, admiring people on a TV show or a movie, and I admired them because it's people I wanted to be. And it wasn't about money and clothes and all that kind of stuff. It was just like, oh, they lived a life I was really curious about, or finding acceptance. So I do think entertainment brings us together, and it lets us dream, right? And it also just makes it a little easier to digest those ideas sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because like in this day and age, entertainment has become almost a bad word.
Yeah,
right. When you say entertainment, it almost assumes you've taken some artistry, you've stripped artistry away and are now just pandering for, ratings or likes, right? But entertainment in true sense is just an engaging activity, right? Like, so, and well, that's probably not a completely accurate definition, but for the purpose of this context, right? Entertainment is just a way to move people's emotions and to get their attention and to get them to think and be still and pay attention. And so from that perspective, like I said, in the ancient oral traditions, it was always present in humanity. So to me, it's no surprise that we're still using it to push movements forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, okay, so I'm curious because I know that you perform and I've seen multiple articles about you in different places. I'm curious, is there anything that people rarely ask that you wish people knew about either you or the work that you're doing?
Wow. A question people rarely ask. Oh, that's a good one, Christopher. You really throw me on the spot with that one.
Well, you can think about it if you want, because I have another question for you already.
I have
All right, you think about that one. Here's the question that I'm starting to ask a lot of different guests and just people that I interact with. And the context of this is that the work and the focus I have is about celebrating the things that make us different, and helping people see what makes them different, because it's not always the obvious.
Right.
You know, it's not always just our skin color or if what community we belong to. Those are things that are important, but it's not the only thing. So I'm curious, would you consider yourself or would you consider the things that make you different helpful in your life today?
Oh, that's one of those questions where it depends on which thing you're talking about.
And
right?
And you can pick any of those things.
I would say overall, generally, the things that make me different have helped me, mainly because I've gotten to a space where I make it a point to be conscious to realize what those differences are. And not only what those differences may be inherently, but maybe those differences are according to society's perspective or where society places me.
Yeah.
Right? And then utilizing those differences for something good. For instance, we'll just take the most obvious, my incarceration, right? My incarceration could have been 20 years of just nothing, right? It could have been 20 years that just produced nothing and only took away. But instead, it can be used for progress. My own personal progress and healing, as well as that of others. And ironically enough, what I love about when we come to realize differences is that when we start to kind of look at these differences, we realize, oh, they're not that different, right? Like, so one of the things I like to show people is like, so when you're inside, you get used to a transient environment, right? Because of the nature of the Department of Corrections in Michigan anyway, you have transfers. So for any reason, you can be transferred from one institution to another. And they've also made it so where you can't communicate with your fellow prisoners who aren't in the same institution as you. So you can't send mail and letters to them anymore like you used to. So you'll make a friend, right? And you may be with this person for a year. You're living together. So, you know, and if in certain institutions, you may be together 23 hours, 21 hours a day. So you can imagine the bond you forge with that person, right? And then the next day on a Tuesday, they're told they have to leave and they're gone, right? And someone else now has to fill that role. That new best friend, you have to go through that again, and you get to going through that over and over and over. And whereas that is trauma inducing and causes trauma, it's also something that, for instance, a university student has to deal with, right? Yeah. A staff faculty at the university has to deal with. They have a turnover rate every semester. There's new students that they have to get to know. They have to educate, and they have to, especially when we start talking about grad students, they have to assign to different research projects, right? But the nature of our environment itself is transitory. That transitory experience of incarceration is sharp, more immediate, more painful. But when you start to speak to people on those terms, what makes you apparently and obviously and patently different now becomes a thing that you have in common with someone, because they may not be able to relate to that exact experience, but the theme of the experience they can empathize with, like, oh yeah. So I think, you know, that's what I try to do.
I think you actually, it's like I fed you the answer, because I really wanted you to like talk about some of that stuff, because I think that's the beauty of it, right? Is you wouldn't be doing, and this is not 100% true, but I think that there's more incentive for you to do it. You wouldn't be doing the work that you're doing today if you weren't incarcerated. Right. Like, you may not find your space, you know, your place there. Now, we don't know the future, right? And those channels or the directions you could have gone in. But, and so I think there's real beauty in finding, if you can see it, the strength in what makes you different, or the value in those experiences, and turn those into something else that you're doing. Right. So I think that does make sense. Well, we're actually, we're even a little over time that I had planned, but this has been so terrific. I do want to follow up with just at least one last question too, because I think there are some things online that people can see and find, but what's the best place for people to find you online if they wanted to read some of your work or find out more about the work that you're doing?
My Facebook page, Cozine A Welch Jr. That's pretty much, like, right now, that's it. I mean, they can contact me directly through my UMich email, cwelchjr@umich.edu.
Okay. What if they want to learn about like maybe even just atonement, or are there places for just even some of the programs?
prisonarts.org, PCAP. They can do a Google search of PCAP and visit our homepage and learn all about the stuff we're doing and things that are planned up. They can submit and become part of our linkage project or community members, and they'll be informed about new events happening, where they can help out, how they can help out, events taking place near them. What does another mean? Yeah, pretty much those are those two sources: PCAP, me directly, the linkage project. Can't lose.
That's great. Well, I so much appreciate you doing this. And for everybody else that you don't know, we've been planning this for like months. We've been trying to work on this, and we kept changing dates on each other back and forth. And so I'm really excited that this happened, and it all started from following you on Instagram. So I'm glad that we made that connection.
Me too. I am too.
Yeah.
I was like, it just happened in such a weird, organic way.
It did. And I don't even know how I stumbled on something that you wrote or something that connected. And I was like, who's this guy? But that's kind of how I work. I'm super curious, and I go down every rabbit hole. So,
Before I forget, they can also go Plow Quarterly online. They can find work of mine, Plow Quarterly, Michigan Quarterly Review, Periphery. Of course, prisonarts.org, the Michigan Review of Prison Creative Writing. You can get back issues, our most recent issue, Surrenderance, which is out now. You can even go online at Literati and order directly from Literati. Okay. If I don't stop, I won't. So.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Let me just do a little quick wrap up here. So, obviously I think it's been a great episode. And if you want to see past episodes of our stories live, you can just go to accidentalinformation.com. There's also other shows that we host and additional resources to help celebrate those things that make different. And that's it for our episode. So like I said, if you are watching this in the replay, put in the comments where you're watching from. And even if there's some extra guests or things that you want to know about or people I should talk to. All right. Thanks so much.